The Middle Ages are often remembered as a time of castles, kings, and knights. But behind the stone walls of those castles, there was another reality. A world where justice was not about truth, but about control. Where pain was used as a tool, and fear was a weapon. Where confessions could be forced, and silence could be punished. Across medieval Europe, methods were developed not just to punish, but to break the human spirit. Many of these practices were hidden deep within dungeons, far from public view. Others were carried out openly, meant to send a message to anyone who dared to challenge authority. This is the story of some of the most inhuman methods used during the age of kings and empires, and the system that allowed them to exist. In medieval society, law and power were closely connected. Rulers, nobles, and institutions such as the Catholic Church held immense authority over people's lives. Maintaining control was not just important, it was necessary to preserve order in a world filled with conflict, instability, and fear. Punishment was one of the most powerful tools available. It served two purposes: to deal with those accused of crimes, and to send a warning to everyone else. But unlike modern justice systems, medieval investigations often relied on something very different from evidence. They relied on confession. And if a confession was not given, it could be taken. Inside stone castles and underground chambers, individuals accused of crimes were brought into interrogation rooms. These spaces were deliberately designed to intimidate, dark, enclosed, and isolated from the outside world. The goal was not always to discover the truth. The goal was to make the accused speak. In many cases, people were already assumed guilty. Trials could be influenced by fear, rumors, or political motives. Once accused, proving innocence became extremely difficult. This is where torture became part of the system. Not always as random cruelty, but as a structured method used during interrogations. Authorities believed that pain could force truth out of silence. That under enough pressure, anyone would reveal what they knew, or what they were told to say. Over time, different methods were developed, each designed to increase fear and compliance. Some focused on restraint, preventing movement for long periods. Others focused on psychological pressure, using darkness, isolation, and uncertainty to break a person's will. And some were designed to demonstrate power, making examples out of individuals in ways that others would never forget. But perhaps the most disturbing part of all this was how normal it became. Because in the medieval world, these methods were not always seen as cruelty. They were seen as justice. As the medieval system of justice evolved, so did the methods used to enforce it. Across castles, fortresses, and underground chambers, different techniques were developed, each with a specific purpose. Some were meant to extract confessions. Others were designed to intimidate, to demonstrate authority, or to discourage rebellion before it even began. Within the legal framework of the time, especially during periods influenced by institutions like the medieval Inquisition, interrogation became more structured. There were rules, at least in theory, about when and how force could be used. But in practice, those limits were often blurred. One of the most common approaches was restraint. Prisoners could be held in positions that restricted movement for long periods of time. These methods didn't always leave visible marks, but they created intense physical strain and discomfort. The longer someone endured it, the more pressure they felt to say anything that would make it stop. Another method relied on suspension. In some cases, individuals were lifted or held in ways that placed stress on their bodies, making it difficult to maintain balance or relieve tension. The goal was not immediate harm, but prolonged pressure. Over time, even the strongest individuals would struggle to endure it. Then there was isolation. Dark, confined spaces were used to separate prisoners from any sense of time or connection. Without light, sound, or human contact, the mind itself became a battlefield. Hours could feel like days. Days could feel endless. And in that silence, fear often grew stronger than any physical restraint. Public punishment also played a major role. Not all methods were hidden. Some were carried out in front of crowds, market squares, town centers, or castle courtyards. These displays were meant to send a message. They reinforced authority and reminded people of the consequences of disobedience. But beyond the physical and the public, there was something deeper at work. Psychological control. The uncertainty. The waiting. The knowledge that something could happen at any moment. This constant tension often broke people faster than anything else. Because in many cases, the threat itself was enough. By the end of these interrogations, the outcome was often the same. A confession, whether true or not. And once that confession was given, the system moved forward. Because in the medieval world, the process was not always about finding truth. It was about maintaining control. As the day progressed in a medieval castle or fortress, the shadow of authority loomed larger than ever. Punishment was not only about the individual, it was about everyone watching, everyone who might think of challenging power. Public spaces became stages of fear. Market squares and courtyards were often used to display consequences for crimes, real or imagined. Even if a person had already been punished in private, a public demonstration reinforced the message. Resistance or disobedience carried visible, unavoidable consequences. One of the most effective tools of control was reputation. Rumors of certain punishments spread faster than the punishments themselves. People learned what might happen not by witnessing it directly, but by hearing whispered accounts of those who had suffered. In this way, terror became a social instrument, influencing behavior without direct intervention. Inside the dungeons and interrogation chambers, the combination of physical strain and psychological pressure reached its peak. Prisoners were often subjected to prolonged questioning while restrained, isolated, or under constant surveillance. The uncertainty of what might come next, the anticipation of pain or exposure, intensified the sense of helplessness. Medieval authorities were strategic in how fear was administered. Some prisoners were spared the worst treatment for a time, only to have their endurance tested later, teaching others that compliance did not guarantee safety. Others were chosen for public examples, reinforcing the hierarchy of power. Despite the brutality, human resilience persisted. Prisoners learned to navigate the system, finding moments of solidarity, exchanging small acts of comfort, and sometimes enduring silently to preserve life. These fleeting acts of humanity, however small, reminded those under oppression that they were still more than their circumstances. The goal of these punishments extended beyond punishment itself. They shaped behavior, maintained the social order, and reinforced the absolute authority of rulers. Fear was a tool, justice a spectacle, and survival a daily challenge. By the end of the day, both observers and participants understood the lesson clearly. In the Middle Ages, authority was not negotiated. It was imposed, and it was often inhuman. As evening fell over the stone walls of castles and fortresses, the visible punishments gave way to another layer of control. One that was quieter, more insidious, and often hidden from public view. Not every act of cruelty was meant to be seen. Many methods were designed to extract information, obedience, or wealth without witnesses. Dark chambers, secluded dungeons, and locked rooms became laboratories of fear, where prisoners were isolated and subjected to long hours of interrogation or restraint. The absence of witnesses magnified the psychological strain. The unknown often became more terrifying than any physical action. Medieval authorities understood the power of uncertainty. Prisoners never knew what the next hour would bring. Was there another interrogation? Another display of pain? Or would they be released, only to face it again later? This constant unpredictability kept minds focused on survival rather than resistance. Even within these private spaces, the system relied on subtle hierarchies. Guards, clerks, and jailers were often complicit, carefully observing and reporting behavior. Small signs of defiance or hesitation could trigger harsher treatment. In some cases, individuals were coerced to betray friends or neighbors, creating fear and mistrust that extended beyond the walls of the dungeon. Psychological manipulation was just as crucial as physical pressure. Darkness, silence, and monotony were weaponized. Prisoners were deprived of sleep, isolated for days, and left in constant anticipation of what might happen next. Over time, the mind began to weaken, and even the strongest individuals could be forced into compliance. Yet, even under the harshest conditions, human endurance persisted. Prisoners found ways to survive, by forming small alliances, sharing information in whispers, or relying on brief moments of comfort. These small acts of resistance preserved dignity and offered hope, however fragile, within a world designed to strip it away. By the time night fully fell, the lessons of the day were clear. Punishments, both public and private, were not random acts of cruelty. They were calculated strategies to maintain power, suppress rebellion, and shape society through fear. The Middle Ages may be remembered for knights and kings, but behind the grandeur, the true rulers often wielded terror as their most potent weapon. Night in the medieval world brought no real peace. For prisoners, the day's trials ended, but the fear lingered. In the quiet of dungeons and chambers, the mind replayed what had occurred: the interrogations, the punishments, the endless uncertainty of survival. These methods of control left a mark beyond the body. Psychological scars persisted long after release, shaping behavior, loyalty, and the very way people perceived authority. Fear became a tool that extended far beyond the dungeon walls, influencing communities and ensuring compliance through stories, rumors, and visible displays of consequence. Yet even in the face of relentless oppression, the human spirit found ways to endure. Acts of solidarity, whispered encouragement, and shared survival strategies reminded prisoners that even under the harshest conditions, humanity could persist. These quiet resistances were often invisible to history, but they were vital for survival, and for preserving a sense of self when the world sought to erase it. The inhuman methods of the Middle Ages were more than punishment. They were instruments of power. They shaped societies, maintained hierarchies, and reinforced the authority of kings, lords, and institutions. But they also left lessons. They remind us how fear can be manipulated, how justice can be twisted, and how cruelty can be normalized when unchecked authority goes unchallenged. As we look back, these dark practices offer a stark reflection on the fragility of freedom and the cost of power when wielded without accountability. They are not just relics of a distant past. They are warnings for every generation about the dangers of control, the weight of fear, and the resilience required to survive in a world that often values obedience over justice. The Middle Ages may have ended centuries ago, but the echoes of these inhuman methods continue to challenge us to remember, reflect, and ensure that such cruelty is never normalized again.